Thank you so much for joining another episode of Celeste the Therapist Podcast. My name is Celeste. I'm a therapist from Boston. I have a returning special guest. I'm going to have him introduce himself to you all.
Hey, everybody. Brad Watts. I'm a therapist in Knoxville, Tennessee, and work with a lot of trauma and a lot of sibling sexual abuse.
Thank you for being here. And we had such a great conversation last time back in 2021. Your episode is one of the episodes that is continuously replayed every single week. And it's not by accident. If you haven't listened to the episode, check it out. You learn a little bit about how Brad got into the field. And this is around the pandemic that we started this conversation. And I learned a lot just through having him on. But for those who may not be familiar with like sibling sexual abuse and why it's misunderstood, how would you define that, like sibling sexual abuse?
Yeah, sibling sexual abuse. What we're looking at is any kind of sexual contact that's not age appropriate. Um, David Finkelhor back in 1980 said not transitory, meaning it happens more than once or twice, but it can happen just once. That's a really important designation, and it's not age appropriate. And so usually, one of the things we like to focus on is the intent. Um, Typically, if kids are just exploring, it's going to happen once or twice. It's going to happen in front of you. Usually, they're not hiding anything. So a lot of times, what we see, a core of it is coercion, manipulation, those kinds of things, with the purpose of sexual gratification.
Right. And as humans, like the idea of sexual gratification happens. And I think I'm a very I'm very transparent and I talk about the elephant in the room with my kids and I know and I'm grateful that like it didn't happen with me, right? It wasn't like I grew up this way. And I think that a lot of times parents struggle with having conversations because they haven't had it themselves, or if like they look at their child as like this innocent being and they don't want to think about that, or they don't think it could happen in their family. For parents that are listening, right? What are some, I want to talk about some ways that you can kind of talk to your kids about the possibilities because, like Brad said, the exploring happens, you feel things, and then you may not know what's right or wrong because guess what? Nobody's talking about it.
Yeah, it's important just to be proactive, kind of like what you are with your kids. Just having age appropriate, conversations about sex, and really what happens even at a young age, you're opening up the dialogue. So they can come to you as opposed to coming to school with their friends or porn, which is ever present everywhere, or just sexual content, and then to talk about, hey, if anybody, this is what you're going to do. If anybody tries to touch you, if anybody asks to touch you, and to let people know, a lot of parents just that I come across, they're like, I don't even know that this was a thing. You think about the external threat outside, but we don't think about that this could happen within our homes.
Yeah, the external threat like stranger danger. And I think a lot of research and you see that it's people that are close to you. Last time on the podcast, one of my misconceptions is that I assumed that the main reason or things that why this happens is because the person that may be doing the abuse is being abused, which is true, that can happen. But what are some other ways that you've noticed is part of why siblings and before we go there, we're saying sibling sexual abuse, but can you also add other caveats that may be a part of this research that you've been doing over the years?
Oh yeah, yeah. When we talk about siblings, we're not just talking about blood relatives. We're talking about, it could be cousins, it could be foster children, it can be a partner's child, it can be step siblings. You don't
Mhm.
even have to live together.
Mhm.
When we talk about that, we're talking mainly about child on child sexual abuse that
Mhm.
happens. So it's
Mhm.
more all encompassing than a lot of times we can narrow it just by thinking, well, hey, this isn't my blood sibling, but we extended it to that.
Are you looking at age as part of like as what we're talking about today? Is there similar ages within a few years apart?
Yeah, so there's been a misnomer in the past. When you look at the literature on sibling sexual abuse, as far as even ages. Um,
Mhm.
so I'll address that first. In the past, age has been, basically a requirement to define it. So it started out like, hey, within 5 years of age. But I mean, we see it all the time where we're, siblings that could be younger than the older one can abuse the older one. We're really looking at power dynamics, and gender can be a
Mm.
part of that. Age is what we see roughly the average age of the sibling that commits sibling sexual abuse is around 14 to 15. And,
Mhm.
we see anywhere from like age 5 to age 8 on
Okay.
average. So typically, in most cases, there is a substantial age difference of 4 to 5 years, but we need to get away from being like, well, hey, that they weren't 5 years older, they weren't 3 years older. So we've really kind of
Right.
taken that age difference out of the
Okay.
definition.
Okay, that makes sense. So going back to my question, I had this assumption that a lot of it was because one of the persons
All right.
were being abused. But what else are you seeing as part of the things that are coming out with people that may be the abuser?
Well, yeah, and we were talking a little before the show. In the last 4 or 5 years, I've seen even more of this just in my clinical work with it. Pornography is a huge deal, is a huge aspect of this. You know, we're seeing more AI generated porn, and things are trending in that direction too. So a lot of times, what we'll see is kids are curious. Let's say mom and dad aren't talking to them about sex. It feels uncomfortable. It can feel weird, and I don't want to talk to them about it. So they're introduced to porn. Usually the average age is usually about 9 to 10 when they start seeking it out. That's not the first time they're exposed, but usually when kids are seeking it out and about 9 to 10 years old, and then they start looking at it, and then it just they don't have the real world life experiences that we as adults have. They don't have the fully formed brains, and so it can be overwhelming. And then it's like as they start looking, getting engrossed in it, I want to act this out. Who can I act that out with? And typically it's somebody in the home because there's less risk in the home. Now, I want to be clear about something. I'm not saying everybody that looks at porn is going to go and sexually abuse their sibling, but there are risk factors that go with that. And we do see pornography can tremendously escalate the likelihood of that happening for people that have those risk factors available or in their
Yeah, it
life.
makes sense. Yeah, it makes sense because I mean, the more you're exposed to something in your environment, the more you're like, oh, I wonder what this is like. When and I want to talk about the victim, right? Because there's some people that may struggle with the conversation because of the major impact that it's had on their life. What are some ways that victims who, and I would suspect that a lot of cases are never even talked about in the family. And if
Mhm.
they were, it was one conversation and that was it, right? So, what happens with the victims when they are having to live with the sibling, have dinner with the sibling? And then, we're going to go into the parents because as a parent, like, has to be really hard. But what's going on with the sibling that is dealing with the abuse and having to see it? And I'm assuming that, uh, it's probably one of the like, when I think about sexual abuse, it's probably one of the ones that take place for a long time because of just the access. But what happens with this with the victim?
Oh, it's terrible. I mean, think about it. Because sibling sexual abuse lasts longer than any other form. Typically the average age, depending on the study that you look at, is usually between 5 and 7 years. Honestly, like you hit on a really important point. Most cases of sibling sexual abuse, the survivors take it to their grave. They don't tell anybody. The ones that do disclose, usually they disclose around the age of 40 because they just don't have anywhere to go, with that. And then you talk about the layers and working with clients on these kinds of situations. It isn't just like if I'm working with somebody where sexual abuse has happened. There's so many layers and usually so many other forms of polyvictimization as far as other kinds of abuse, psychological, emotional. There can certainly be some narcissistic in there too. As far as from parents that just aren't going to do anything about it, or turn a blind eye to it. It's just so layered, and it's so incredibly difficult, and causes, or can cause, I should say, so many other problems, because so many of these survivors will turn to becoming, and we don't talk much about this, hypersexuality can be a response to that, how they cope. We see a lot of drug and alcohol use, things, anything, even overworking, things to just try and numb so they don't have to think about it. And it affects relationships, affects, I mean, you're talking flashbacks, almost everything in the house is a trauma reminder. So they're stuck in the trauma. And, and a lot of times you'll see kids act out behaviorally in all kinds of ways because they're just trying to escape the home. And so obviously I want to be clear about this. Every situation is different and has its own unique factors, but these are some common, aspects, maladaptive kinds of, behaviors that we see, because the victim is just trying, the survivor is trying to do anything to survive,
Mhm.
such a horrific, interplay of events.
Mhm. And, as Brad's talking, I work with mainly adults, but I remember being in working in the ER in the children's hospital. And one of the things I tell parents is when there's these behaviors that are taking place, pay attention, something's wrong. It's not necessarily always has to be sexual abuse, but something is going on, and children don't have the flexibility to just go leave the house for a walk, go on a vacation. They're more confined than we are as adults. And I think we get so focused on the behaviors. You talk about the hypersexual like activities that take place, the substances. Some people get more into their work, right? Where they become more studious at school, and unfortunately, those people really slip under the rug because they're doing so well while inside they're crumbling. But these behaviors, if you're seeing a switch in your children, and again, it's not that they're being sexually abused, but pay attention to what's happening in their environment, because something may be wrong, and this is the only way that they know how to get it out, unless they're taught something different. Do you feel like that's accurate?
Oh, it's 100% accurate. That's one of the things, I tell people when I do trainings or speak or just talk to people individually, look for behavioral changes. Look
Hmm.
for, and there's tons of examples of this, um, where it's like, hey, I don't want to be around Johnny. Don't leave me alone with him. Or, it's like, well,
Hmm.
what's that about? And for
Yeah.
parents that to just, gently and lovingly ask questions. A lot of times the survivor is afraid that they're going to get in trouble because they can feel like, hey, hey, no, what's being done to them is wrong. But a lot of times that they're being told, that they're going to get in trouble. I'll tell mom and dad what you've done, or whoever the
Yeah.
adult is. So just to kind of, you know, engage in that comfort that, hey, there's nothing you can't tell me, in a loving way, in a supportive way, to just have those lines
Yeah.
open. There's plenty of examples where kids do come forward and tell.
And, and we're going to go into parents now that you said that, when people come and tell. So there are some parents that may have been victims themselves, right? And
Hmm.
hearing that, they freeze, right? They don't know what to do. And I have so much empathy for parents, because you're dealing with two people that you truly love. Um, I it's when I say easier, all any kind of abuse is hard, but it's easier if it was somebody outside of the home, because then you can call the cops right away and do all these things that like make sense. But then when you're talking about somebody that is family and that is a child, there's no roadmap as to what do we do next, which is, we're going to talk about your book at the end.
Hmm.
But for parents, what kind of turmoil is happening with them during this time? Because you do a lot of work around reconciliation, and so what are you hearing from parents, and what kind of message would you have for parents that may be in this situation right now?
Well, I mean, one, you're not alone in it. I think that's one of the things that I've really learned, is so often parents just feel like I'm the only one. I'm isolated. This is just my family, And there are just so this is so common, and it's the general kind of answer we have for this is 3 to 5 times more common than even father daughter or stepfather daughter sexual abuse. It's things that we've seen. So it's much more common than what people realize. The Stanford researcher Annette
That's
Tallman
big. That's
yeah,
huge number.
huge. So Annette Tallman did a study at Stanford back in 2021, and she found of those in therapy, it's those people in therapy that 60% in her study of nearly 15,000 had experienced sibling sexual abuse. So it's much more common than what we think. And then you talk about parents, it's shock, it's disbelief, it's I can't believe this. This cannot be happening. This what is this? A lot of times it's just what is this, because it's so hard to identify it because of the close proximity in age. And then it's like, well, what do I do? Do I report my kid to the cops? Do I report them to DCS? And then all the things that goes on with that, because there's decisions that are out of your control as part of that process, that make it really difficult. So that's why we often see in so many cases, unfortunately, parents don't do anything about it, and then that makes things way worse for survivors. Then it's basically carte blanche for that sibling to continue their abusive behaviors. But yeah, it's trying to get in. The first step is, if you can get in and see a therapist, see somebody, have them report it, and kind of move forward. And what we're trying to do more on our end is get more of the courts out of the way, other than when we need them, to kind of hold things over there, maybe hold a sibling accountable. But treatment based is the key in healing from sibling sexual abuse. It's we need more courts to kind of be there and work hand in hand with us, but not get in the way of what we're doing, allowing us to make treatment recommendations and move forward in treatment based off what the survivor is wanting to do. Not it's really tricky, because every situation is different, and the extent of it. But we really want courts kind of hanging over there, to work in conjunction with us, not to get in the way, because a lot of times courts can get in the way and make it much worse and much more complicated.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I remember working with someone in the hospital who was sharing how, her kids, they were, she walked in on them having sex, and they were young, and the therapist, what Brad's saying, reported it, and then they helped her work on reconciliation, keeping the kids separate,
Mhm.
there was a lot of work that went into it. And it was hard. But to Brad's point, working with the kid, and for parents that have gone through this or in the middle of this, working with your children now is so beneficial. I'm thinking about the victim and the abuser, because the victim doesn't have to suffer in silence, but also with the abuser there, I've talked to people, women and men, who have talked about things that happened when they were young, and their parents weren't around, and the guilt and shame that they feel around it, right? And kids that, they was around the same age and they were exploring, but now there's just all of these maladaptive behaviors that are happening as an adult for the victim and the abuser. And so even if it's hard to do the work, I feel like, and Brad, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like when we can work on it as children, it's easier to take in more information and reconcile than as an adult. We can still work on things as an adult, but I just feel like with kids, it's a little bit easier to do. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, in my experience is exactly that. The prognosis is so much better for families. When particularly when parents act, when they report it, because then it's like, hey, we're prioritizing, and that's what you need to do. The survivor here, there's accountability. We still love you. We're going to be right here
Mhm,
with you, but you're going to go through treatment. There's a certain
mhm,
process that's going to go through, as opposed to, hey, I'm not going to do anything with it. But I'm telling you, as the years go by, it can get more and more difficult, because you have more trauma that's accumulating, particularly for the survivor, that parents haven't done anything. They just swept it under the rug. I had, like you alluded to this earlier, which is a big problem. Hey, we talked about it once, and maybe it was a sport conversation, but you never brought it up again.
Mhm.
It's like, no, these are ongoing conversations about the survivor, and what
Mhm.
he or she needs, and attending to their needs, and then making sure that the sibling that's committed sexual harm, is going through the process, is getting intensive treatment, is
Mhm.
working on that. There may be some court involvement. So there may be a PO involved. There may be some things there that's part of it, but like working through some of those things, and
Mhm.
families can come back together. Um,
Mhm.
and it's a really difficult process, but I just see it. I just see too much of it, and it gives me a lot of hope. With kids, but the ones that seem most hardened are the adults, where there's just layers of trauma, where abuse goes on for years. You're talking hundreds of abusive acts a lot of times that happen on top of the other kinds of abuse that they experience.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so true. And I'm somebody who dealt with abuse growing up, and the conversation happened once and that was it. And so, as I'm sharing this as a therapist and as somebody who's dealt with abuse, that just having a conversation once is not okay, because then you stay in your head and you think like, what's wrong with me? What happened? And it's not until my 20s and 30s is when I'm talking to a therapist about things. And so, you can, because, when it comes to children, we, we absorb things in our environment. We start to make things make sense. We survive hard moments by creating a narrative that may not be true. And so I know you may not have the knowledge, but it's out there, right? We have the phones at our fingertips, and there's knowledge out there. You will be uncomfortable around it, but just because they're still moving through life, you may have put them in all of these things. I think parents want to like, let's forget these things happen. And it, even outside of sexual abuse in general, when trauma happens, I think we want to like pretend it didn't happen. Hopefully they forget. We get them all these things, we take them places. The body doesn't forget, right? So just know that regardless of how many things you do or try to make up for it, if they're not able to be seen, it's going to sit with them in an unhealthy way.
Yeah, yeah, without question.
Mhm.
And it'll just manifest itself in different ways. Sometimes it's as an adult. It's okay. Years later, I'm having these dreams. What are these? I'm having these faint memories, and then it
Yes.
starts coming back. And we know that from
Yes.
trauma. It's fragmented, those memories, but a lot of times parents can be avoidant, like, oh, okay,
Yeah.
let's not rock the boat on this. And I don't want to put them in treatment because of whatever reason,
Yeah.
and those things tend to manifest themselves later.
Yes, yes. I've sat with people who came in for some behaviors, and the more we talk, the more the memories start coming back, and they start to remember these hard things. That's the mind is so powerful. It can help us survive hard situations by making things fragmented. And so it gets stored deep, deep, deep inside. And so now you're responding off of these things, but don't understand, and you're not making connections. And that's where me and Brad come in as therapists, and we're talking to people and we're helping them make connections. And so know that you're not going to rock the boat by bringing up something that's inside. That is so important, I think, for parents to understand when it comes to their children. Um, when it comes to, I'm going to talk about reconciliation, then your book. When it comes to reconciliation, what does that look like? Because you do that work, and I
Yeah.
know it's probably easier to work with reconciliation when they're younger and people are still in the same house. What does that look like on your end? Because it's not an easy job, right? You're dealing with victims, you're
Right.
dealing with the abuser who may have been a victim as well, or who just may be exploring based off of what they were exposed to. That is so hard to reconcile with. What does that look like?
Well, you're right. Younger it tends to be better, because it's particularly where there's been accountability. I think the problem is when there was no accountability and you get
Yes.
older, that this isn't fair. You
Hmm.
guys didn't do anything, because so
Hmm.
often sibling sexual abuse, it's been described as a family earthquake, and it can split families right down the middle. What
Mhm.
helps is, so when we speak of it, we talk about like reconciliation, which is just kind of bringing the relationship back together. Doesn't mean they're
Mhm.
absolutely like living together. And then
Mhm.
reunification, which is when they're coming back in the home if they've been out.
Ah,
But you're
yeah.
right, every situation is different as far as when siblings are taken out of the home for a period of time. When we talk about siblings, we're talking about the one who's abused. We
Yep.
never want to take the survivor out as some sort of
Right.
punishment or anything like that. But there's a lot of work and treatment prior to that. The survivor, is going through treatment. The survivor needs to want that to happen. The survivor
Yeah.
doesn't want it to happen. We don't have it. And then the other aspect is, where is the one that's committed sexual harm and done the harm here? Where are they at? And so, getting to a form of treatment too. Every situation is different on the timeline. We don't need to wait like a year for that to happen. But it's just they need to. There's some preconditions that need to be met. The one who's abused needs to take full responsibility, full accountability and ownership on that, and has been working
Mhm.
to maintain safety there. And then we bring them together. But what we find is, and there'll be a variety of sessions, and we go slow on that. But what we find is typically siblings want to know that they're getting help, that the abuser's getting help. They
Mhm.
want to know that their sibling is taking accountability, and they're not going to do it anymore
Mhm.
to anybody else, and they want to know why. Why?
Mhm.
Um, and then as accountability and forgiveness and those kinds of things are all on an individual basis. But there's a lot of supports we put, around the family. And what we really look at and what we see a lot of is that there's kind of this underneath cracks in the foundation, so to speak, in families. And this is an opportunity to really reinforce and build,
Mhm.
and to
Yes.
move forward in a much healthier way.
Yeah.
But yeah, the sooner we can do that, as far as age wise, the sooner after sexual abuse has happened, the better. As you have 5 or 10 years or hundreds of acts, and there's no accountability, they kind of go on their lives. It becomes much more difficult to
Mm.
reconcile people in that kind of way.
Yeah, because
Doesn't mean
I
it
think
can't
in
happen, but yeah, it's hard.
yeah, it can happen, but it has to be harder because people try. Your ego gets in the way. You try to make sense of it and create a narrative. It's harder to break through that when it goes unchecked for so long. And as Brett's talking about the cracks in the foundation, I always say like healthy relationships are built through hard conversations. And unfortunately, we're not talking to each other. We're not having hard conversations because it feels scary, but what feels scarier is going through life with all of this pain, just sitting there. And so I just want to encourage people that, yes, it's hard to have these hard conversations to confront the thing that is happening. But I've been in this field for so many years. I mean, as a client and as a therapist, I promise you, on the other side of it, there's more peace. It's hard to have peace when you have this thing sitting in you that you haven't reconciled with. So,
Yeah.
um, now Brad has a book actually called "A Guide for Confronting America's Silent Epidemic," and share actually why you called it a silent epidemic. I just want to read one. There's so many reviews. One of the reviews says, "I'm a survivor of sibling sexual abuse, and I felt like I was alone. No one was talking about it. Little research, and then finally, Brad Watts wrote a book about it. I felt heard, validated, and seen. He confirmed so many things that I suspected. I was not alone. I was not imagining the damage, and my sibling was not a monster. This is the most common form of child sexual abuse. If parents are not aware, not talking about it, this makes their home vulnerable. This type of abuse tears whole families apart. This book should be a parenting handbook for all parents so they talk to their children and are learning and are looking for signs. It's an excellent book with studies that are easily absorbed." Brad, you did that. And there are countless of reviews like that on Amazon. How did this book come about? Why are you calling it a silent epidemic? I think after this conversation, people understand, but if
Yeah.
you can share with us why.
Yeah, I was, I forget how many years ago, but working in residential in Virginia, and was assigned to what they call their TSA unit, treatment for sexual acting out. So there's two
Mhm.
units there. And so over the course of a few years, I just kept seeing these patterns in my treatment. And so I'd written this kind of family therapy guide kind of thing.
Mhm.
And I took it back here to present at a conference. And I talked at the conference at BCU up in Richmond. And, it was really well attended. People were sharing their stories, and it cut
Mhm.
across like all demographics that you could imagine.
Yep.
And it just really, really, hit me. And then after that, I was just like, after all these conversations with parents and just other people, I'm like, why are we not talking about this? Why is this not being addressed? And I was like, you know what? I just want to write kind of a book for people to kind of that's accessible to kind of understand what's kind of going on with this, to kind of provide somewhat of a roadmap. What do you
Mhm.
expect? Everybody's journey is different, of course.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
but also for others to pick it up and realize, hey, what a problem this is. But above all, that for people to know that they're not alone in this. And so,
Yes.
obviously, it's given me lots of opportunities. Like Jane, whose comment there, has she started a great organization for people to kind of go to with questions
Wow,
called
that's
Five
so
Ways.
cool.
And she's a frequent collaborator of mine, and has written her own book and her own story.
Oh my
And
God.
I definitely encourage people to get involved and check her stuff out. And what Five Waves does, particularly with questions that you have, they've got groups, they've got all kinds of stuff. So I've been able to collaborate with them quite
Can
often.
you say the name of it so I could put it in the show
Yeah,
notes?
it's Five Waves, and I think
Oh,
it's
Black Wave.
.org, but if not,
Okay.
just look up Five Waves, and they've
Okay.
got everything you could imagine, every resource imaginable when it comes to sibling sexual abuse. And these are five women that all have different kinds of experiences with sibling sexual abuse, touching their lives through lived experience. So anyway, it's a great resource for your listeners that have questions to go and check it out. My book's on there. There's a lot of stuff, a lot of research, anything you can imagine. They've got some groups, which are very valuable. So, I encourage
Thank
everybody
you.
to check that out.
And I just want to reiterate what Brad said, like, because this isn't just a single parent homes, low socioeconomic status. You could be functional, dysfunctional, toxic, untoxic, no matter race, color, money, how much you make. This does not discriminate, right? So I think for some people that might be like, oh, this could never happen to me. Know that it's just kind of like cancer, unfortunately. Like we don't like it doesn't matter whether it's hereditary or not. It just seems like it's just happening. You eat healthy, you don't eat healthy. Like,
Yeah.
would you say that's accurate from your
Oh,
experience?
oh, 100%.
Okay.
I mean, I've consulted with people that, and it's true. It happens in healthy families. It happens in unhealthy families.
Hmm.
It cuts across the board. I think this can't touch me. I mean, look. I mean, I study this stuff. It's
Hmm.
like it could hit my family. I mean,
Hmm.
it's like it can hit anybody's. And
Hmm.
I think more as a worldwide kind of community to be able to talk more about this, and
Hmm.
so people can know, it would just help
Yes.
so much if people can be,
Yes.
oh, I can go do this or that. Um,
Yes.
but there is more positive, we're seeing more media cover things, more national kinds of things. There's more going on. And so there's definitely been a lot of improvement, but we've got a
Hmm.
long way to go.
Are you proud of yourself, Brad? This is amazing, like the work that you're doing. I had to like stalk him down to get him back on. No, I just really appreciate you putting all of this energy into this because it's so important, it's so needed. And like I started this podcast because I don't want people to I want people to know they're not alone, and I want people to know that there are people that are doing things to empower other people by sharing their story. Just like the Jane who started this thing, right? She read this book and she realizes like, oh, there's other people, and there's something powerful about that, which is why this podcast was started. So I just want to say thank you for what you're doing. If you have any last words you want to share with my audience,
Yeah,
you can
I
do
I
that.
just I appreciate you having me on, like when the first book came out, and all you're doing, to, to
Thank you.
to shed light to it. And I just want people to know you're not doing anything wrong if this happens in your family. A lot of times
Yeah.
it's, what have I done wrong? How have I failed? You haven't failed. You haven't
Yes.
done anything wrong. I think that's a great example you use, Celeste. It's like cancer. It doesn't discriminate. But if we can just kind of band together and
Mhm.
help and just try to be there to support each other through this and to talk about it.
Mhm.
I think it's one of the best things we can do is just talk about it, bring it to light,
Mhm.
so that people can understand. Hey, this is where I can go. Like if I have cancer,
Yeah.
oh, I can post. I can say, hey, where can I go to get treatment? Or I'm going to go here and take
Yes.
action. If we do that, we're going to have a lot better outcomes as a result.
Yes. Yes. Brad, thank you so much. I truly
Thank
appreciate
you.
you taking time out to talk to my audience. And thank you all for listening. You'll go find the information for his book and the show notes, and I will talk to you guys